Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, education change and reform is in the air. We have the Secretary of Education and Patti from the Pennsylvania Business Council on hand, and then guess what? We're going to get a new Auditor General, but the leaving Auditor General, the departing Auditor General, Jack Wagner, is here for some parting words. All of that follows these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, Terry Madonna, I'm back. I sort of mutilated that introduction, but that's what happens sometimes. Well, sitting across from me is the Secretary of Education, Ron Tomalis. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the program.
Good to be here, Terry.
I should say of Education. And our old friend Patti, he's the President and CEO of Pennsylvania Business Council. David, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Secretary, I want to talk about Common Core, and you're going to make this intelligible so that the folks understand why you think this is important. But I don't get this big debate over, let's start with this, over this No Child Left Behind, which sets standards that states are supposed to reach, right?
Absolutely it does.
Why is that a problem?
Well, right now, the No Child Left Behind law is coming to the end of its shelf life. It was passed in 2001. It was expected to be reauthorized by now. We had targets in that law of students to be 100% at grade level by 2014. We're not making those targets.
I think that's true.
Congress and the Obama administration haven't come to agreement on the reauthorization, and so we're getting to the end of a process that people thought would have ended 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. So our expectations of making these targets are just a little bit out of reach.
I get it. Is the law a good? You've spent a good bit of time on educate. Yeah, is that a good law or a bad law?
It was a good law. It was targeted. I mean, there's always little things you can quibble with.
Yeah.
But the main thrust was great. The driving the states to allow states to get there as they saw fit, to tailor programs to their unique issues within their state and their education systems, I think was appropriate. It was a federalist system.
Right.
But also putting a high expectation on performance, that's the only way you get there.
Now, you're shaking your head, so basically you're okay with that, right?
I think that was exactly the intent of the law. Yeah. Not only that, but it was to shine the light of day of where we're succeeding and where our challenges are. Mm-hmm. And the other important part of No Child Left Behind was that we had to disaggregate the data. What that means is that we had to break the test score data down into different groups. And so we had some school districts, and we still do in Pennsylvania, where we have 75, 80% of our kids at grade level, but we have a very consistent group of kids who never achieve academic standards. And what the NCLB was all about was making sure that those kids aren't lost in the totality of the score.
Okay, so the whole point of this was to create some common standards and to put pressure on states. You would then put pressure on school districts in order to make sure that students were achieving. Is that right, David?
Yeah, that would be my view. Sure.
Absolutely.
You agree with that?
And the way that the pressure is there is to shine the light of day of how well kids are doing on their academics.
Okay. It wasn't that there are sanctions or anything. It's just if the public knows, they'll say, well, we can do better. We want to do better.
Yeah. Was there any funding with this? No.
Well, there was increase in funding when President Bush passed No Child Left Behind. Record levels of funding. There's record levels of funding in K-12 education in Pennsylvania now. Right. Pennsylvania's taxpayers are paying about $27 billion a year on K-12 education in Pennsylvania, which is more than double than it was 15 years ago.
15 years ago. Okay, I'm going to talk about this element in education policy known as the Pennsylvania Common Core and Keystone exams. I want to keep this. Why should people out there, why should our viewers care about what's in the Common Core?
The Common Core are a set of standards across some very basic areas: math, language arts, civics, and government. That if students are...
I like the last part, by the way.
So do I, and so does the governor. So to make sure...
So does David. Go ahead.
To make sure that when students come out of high school, that they have a high quality level of education to be able to succeed either in post-secondary or directly in the workforce. And one of the initiatives that the governor is very adamant about is making sure that every student is prepared to have a successful career, whether that career means a frontline job in a trade or going on to a post-secondary environment, a four-year college or some other post-secondary institution. If you don't have the basics, then you can't succeed.
Okay, and is Pennsylvania law require a Common Core?
Technically, no.
That's
but
what I didn't think.
Pennsylvania regulations, we've adopted the Common Core in the regulations, and we're actually moving our curriculum at the local level to implement the Common Core standards. So the Common Core are very Pennsylvania specific in what we need to do.
One of the things important to recognize too is though Pennsylvania's Common Core came out of standards that Pennsylvania already had that go back several administrations. So we're not new to this.
So it's not new.
So we're evolving Chapter 4 regulations. All right. And the great thing is Common Core is a state-based initiative, not the federal government pushing down.
All right. I want to continue with this conversation and particularly talk about these Keystone exams, and we'll get into that. Education policy, we'll see where it goes. That's why we have the Secretary and David here to help us. We'll be back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program. We're talking with Dave Patti. Jack Wagner, the Auditor General, will be on in a moment with Dave Patti and Ron Tomalis. We're chatting about education in Pennsylvania, particularly the Common Core standards. Mr. Secretary, I want to ask you explain to our folks Keystone exams. What are they and why should anybody care about them?
We have a series of exams in Pennsylvania that were put in place actually in the middle of the 90s, where every student in Pennsylvania takes an exam, the PSSA, between 3rd grade and 8th grade. And what that does, it's very helpful to parents in understanding how well their children are doing in their schools. But at the same time, it helps the teachers understand and the administrators understand where we're succeeding and where we need to do more work. We're moving to a high school exam called the Keystones.
So that'll extend it. Instead of we'll have the two we have at, and then we'll go into high school with a third exam. Exactly.
Right now, there's one exam in 11th grade at the PSSA. We're actually moving to what we call end-of-course exams. You take Algebra 1. At the end of the year that you take Algebra 1, you're going to be taking an Algebra 1 test. And those are going to be in the very key areas of language arts, reading and writing, and composition, in biology, and we're going to have Algebra 1. And we believe, and the governor strongly believes, that if you have a foundation of knowledge, a strong base of knowledge in those key areas, regardless of what you want to do in life, whether you want to be a welder, whether you want to be a neurosurgeon, you need that basic understanding.
What about this business about teaching for the test? And you hear the...
There are times I actually, respond to people. Yeah, I sure hope we will start teaching to the test because I would like kids to understand this core knowledge, as the Secretary said. I mean, it's essential for career and college readiness. If you're going to go on, you have to master that knowledge. But the beautiful thing about the end of course exams is, rather than like Regents in New York where you take it all at the end and maybe you remember it from 3 years ago, maybe you don't. Now we're doing it right away. If somebody didn't understand it, we give them a remediation right away, a chance to do it over, a chance to really master that, get that knowledge in there. And it can replace, in terms of testing, it can replace the final exam if the school district wants to.
Where are you in the process of implementing these exams?
We started putting the Keystones in place this year.
That's
and,
what I thought.
And it's going to have an impact on kids or students in the year 2017. And they have to pass the exam in order to graduate in Pennsylvania. We've actually been offering an awful lot of resources down to the building and into the teacher level so that we're giving the teachers the tools that they need in order to meet this. This will have a huge impact in two areas. Now, not only will the students be able to graduate high school and be able to go into the workforce or be able to go into other paths of life that they choose, but one of the areas that the governor has been concerned about, that we've been concerned about, all of us have been concerned about, is the level of remediation that we see in post-secondary. If these students come out of high school and have these core knowledge and understanding, then they're not going to need remediation when they get into post-secondary, which will cut down the time that it takes to them to finish their degree.
Yeah, we'll have to have, I'll have to have you back. We're out of time in this segment, and I want to talk with you a little bit about this transition as a college professor for my entire career. I'm not sure half the kid, not 10, 15% shouldn't even be spending their senior year in high school. They should be in college. Right. But we can talk about that debate. All right, the outgoing Auditor General of the state, Jack Wagner, is coming up next. He's done a great job, an outstanding job, actually. I don't often to promote politicians on his program, but I think by consensus he's done a great job. We're going to hear from him after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program with outgoing Auditor General of the state, Jack Wagner. As I said, I think that General Wagner has done a great job. We often criticize a lot of our politicians. I'm not going to criticize this guy. General Wagner, welcome.
Thank you.
You've done a great job. And going out the door, so to speak, you've done this audit of the Turnpike Commission that I think is worthy of some discussion. You have at least two big concerns. One is something called swaps, in which it costs the taxpayers a lot more money than it should. And the second one is all sorts of things about expenses in those. Let's take one of them up. Let's go to the swaps. Help me out with that.
Okay, well, they're both symbolic of a larger problem, which is really the debt of the Turnpike and the management of the Turnpike. Interest rate swaps are financial derivatives in terms of borrowing money for capital projects and how you borrow the money. And with interest rate swaps, they are borrowing money with variable interest rates and are betting with the investment firm on the movement of those rates up and down.
So in other words, it's like a variable interest rate in a mortgage. It could 1 year go up. Well, you know, they're
1 year
down.
Go up or down, and they're just not exposed to the movement of the interest rate. They're betting with an investment firm on which direction they will move.
I get it.
And our position is that public money should never be used where there is uncertainty as part of the deal. And this is really a deal. This really is betting. And sometimes the public entity wins and sometimes it loses. We have found huge losses with a variety of public entities. The School District of Philadelphia.
I was going to say school districts are doing,
Delaware River Port Authority, the Turnpike Commission, local school districts, Bethlehem School District. And our position with the Turnpike is get out of variable interest rate swaps, get into fixed rate and a predictable rate.
And sometimes you can renegotiate fixed interest rates, right?
Yes, you can.
So that's another way to get a lower interest rate. We all do it for our homes, right?
Well, we do it for our homes, but we don't bet on the movement of the interest rates. In addition to that, the investment firms offer incentives for public entities to get into it. So in other words, they are really putting the public entity in a bad position up front by taking money, and at the same time entering into contracts that they should not be in. Now, again, many times these can go the right way. We have seen too many times when they've gone the wrong way, and we don't think public entities, private entities, fine, okay, not public entities.
You also have some problems with sort of the day-to-day operations of it. What's wrong there?
Well, there's a lot of free passes on the Turnpike, about 7,600. Every employee has a free pass with an ID badge. In addition, there are another 650 Easy Pass transponders that are given to the same employees that have a free ID. There's not good oversight of them. Is this
known as a perquisite? Is that what we would call a perk? Perk?
Yeah, we call that a perk, and they can use them at any time. And our position is quite simple. These Turnpike tolls are going up every year. Every New Year's, you can celebrate New Year's. A few days later, the Turnpike tolls are going up to the public, the driving public, but not for the 7,600 free passes.
All right, we're going to take a break, and we come back. I want to go through, I want you to talk about a couple of the areas of state government. Now, you're leaving office. We've had the incoming Auditor General, Eugene DePasquale, on. He has some goals. I want you to sort of look at state government. You've done, I won't ask you how many audits. You probably don't know. With hundreds, if not thousands of
thousands,
tens of thousands, of where you think the focus ought to be, given your history with this. All right, we'll be back with the Auditor General of the state of Pennsylvania, Jack Wagner, after, I shouldn't say this, after we pay some bills.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Jack Wagner, the outgoing Pennsylvania Auditor General. All right, you know, you've helped expose a lot of waste and fraud and inefficiency in government. What are the areas that you think over your career, that your audits have been the most effective?
Well, I know overall we've brought tremendous independence into the office in a bipartisan way.
Right.
I have served as Auditor General with a Democrat as governor and a Republican as governor. We have looked at the issues the same way in a very professional approach. We have looked at organizations in terms of their leadership, their structure at the very top, such as FIA, such as Penn State. You know, we just released a great report on Penn State in terms of looking at how the trustees function or don't function. And so I think in a general way, generally speaking, I'm most proud of those ways in which we have looked in terms of how organizations function.
Go ahead.
And specifically, we've done great audits of FIA. We actually turned around FIA with our audit. It's a great state agency today. Megan's Law was rated nationally as an F. Today it's an A in terms of identifying child sexual predators and where they live in Pennsylvania. Our recent audit of Penn State in terms of its governance structure, saying that the president of the university
shouldn't be on the board.
It should not be on the board.
And the board is too big.
The board's too big. There's insider movement. The board needs to be more of an overseer and not be passive as they have been in the past. We've done Department of Public Welfare audits. I can think of one, the special allowances, where we've saved the state $150 million every year going forward by identifying fraud, waste, and abuse in that audit. Terry, I could just go down the list and keep mentioning audits.
But I think as government, you know, it's interesting. We have fewer. I think we had like 100,000 employees in 1980. We're down to about, talking about state employees. There's fewer employees, but the reach of government and the spending, even though, you know, the legislature and the government kept spending down a bit in the last 2 years, but with federal government programs and state government programs, the reach of government and the spending has grown exponentially. And often when government grows, you probably know this better than anyone I could have sitting in front of me, when it grows quickly, it doesn't often grow well. Is that right? Too quickly, not enough safeguards? Go ahead.
Well, the Department of Auditor General hasn't grown. That's another accomplishment. I mean, we are 26% less in employees from the day I walked in. My budget today versus 8 years ago is less than it was 8 years ago. So we have tried to lead by example. I mean, I drive a state car. It has 290,000 miles on it. So we have identified areas, looked at them, and you had Secretary Tomalis here. We've looked at the charter school funding formula. It is seriously flawed. The General Assembly has to correct it. We've given them a guideline on how to correct it.
Yeah.
They can save $300 million a year if they follow our direction on the charter school funding formula.
Yeah. Well, if you had to mention 3 or 4 things that you think, if you were to have another year or two, and obviously you don't, where would be the next places? I've had Di Pasquale on. He's talked about some areas he would like to see. What would your recommendations be?
Well, we would continue to focus on education. Education's a big area of state government, about 40% of the cost. Same thing with public welfare. In making sure there's no fraud, waste, and abuse, especially in the DPW area. Education, what recently happened at Sandy Hook, the terrible disaster. We had a similar one in Pennsylvania, in Lancaster, at a private school.
Yep.
We have instituted all audits of public schools, incorporating, looking at their whole safety plan, emergency response plans. I'd like to take a look at the use of antipsychotic drugs with children, something that is supported by government funds, something that I think has gone too far in terms of how we address disruptive children. So if I had more time, I'd look into a lot of those issues. But more importantly, I'd look at the responsibilities of people in charge. I really believe, Terry, that leadership is not talked about enough. Leadership in the General Assembly. The General Assembly has to get their cost under control. We should have a smaller General Assembly in Pennsylvania. I've been an advocate of that for years.
You and most voters.
Yes. So, yes, there's a number of issues that I would continue to look at or get into. I'm hopeful that the new Auditor General will continue some of the things we have done and also bring new initiatives.
Oh, sure. I mean, I think that's obvious, clear. I mean, you get a new director. I know that he talked about doing water quality and DEP. I mean, that obviously, yeah. I mean, I think there has to be a set of priorities. You have limited resources. That's the other thing.
You're exactly right.
Technological changes. We have about 30 seconds left, but technological changes, other things that I'm sure you wish you had the money to do that hopefully he will get some money to do, right?
Well, I doubt it. To be quite frankly, with the financial situation of the Commonwealth and all levels of government.
Right. Look, you did an outstanding job. You were a great public service. Good luck with whatever you decide to do.
Thank you, Terry.
All right, we'll be back next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, you stay well.